Officer Connor and his rookie partner, Lenny, cruised through the city's labyrinthine streets, a lumbering patrol car, the tension inside the vehicle almost suffocating. The silence between them was thick with unspoken words, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. Connor, visibly agitated, used the quiet to voice his mounting frustrations about the recent upheaval in the police department's leadership. His words were laced with bitter contempt as he spoke about the new captain. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Can you believe they put one of them in charge? Connor spat out, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and disdain. The way he clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles white and strained, spoke volumes about his frustration. This department is spiraling out of control. It's as if we're hurtling toward disaster, and there's no one at the helm to steer us back on course. It feels like we're all just passengers on a runaway train, headed straight to hell. Lenny, only a few months into his service, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the weight of Connor's words pressing heavily on his young shoulders. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and Lenny's heart pounded with unease. The bitterness in Connor's voice wasn't just about the new leadership, it was a reflection of deeper prejudices and disillusionments that seemed to cloud his judgment. Lenny's discomfort was compounded by Connor's blatant racism, a toxic undercurrent that made him question the integrity of his role in the department. Maybe we should give the new captain a chance, Lenny suggested, his voice tentative and filled with a cautious hope that reason might prevail. He wanted to believe in the possibility of positive change, even if it felt like a fragile hope against the overwhelming negativity. Connor's reaction was immediate and scornful. He let out a derisive scoff, shaking his head as though Lenny's naivety was almost painful to witness. "You're too naive, kid," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You think they're any different? They're all the same, and you can't trust a single one of them. This place is beyond repair." As they made a turn onto Main Street, Connor's attention was suddenly caught by a sleek black sedan moving effortlessly through the traffic. The driver, a well-dressed black man, adhered to all the traffic laws, but something about him provoked an irrational suspicion in Connor. His narrowed eyes and clenched jaw conveyed a visceral reaction, as if the mere presence of the vehicle was an affront. "Look at that car," Connor muttered with a voice full of barely concealed disdain. "I bet he stole it. Just look at him. There's something about him that doesn't sit right with me." Lenny's frown deepened, his internal struggle mirrored by the tightening knot in his stomach. He felt a deep sense of unease, aware that Connor's instincts were colored by prejudice rather than reason. "We don't have any evidence of wrongdoing," Lenny said, trying to remain calm. "He's not breaking any laws." Connor's response was swift and unyielding. "Is that what you think?" he shot back, his voice sharp with irritation. Time for a little routine check. With a decisive flick, he activated the patrol car's lights, the sudden flash of the siren slicing through the evening's quiet like a knife. The black sedan pulled over smoothly, its driver's demeanor shifting as he tensed visibly. Lenny could feel the gravity of the situation as Connor stepped out of the patrol car with an air of self-righteous authority. The weight of what was about to happen pressed heavily on Lenny's chest, his mind racing with the realization that this traffic stop was veering dangerously into the realm of injustice. "Sir, please," Lenny pleaded, his voice trembling slightly with a mix of anxiety and a desperate plea for reason. "This doesn't feel right." Connor's response was dismissive as he strode toward the sedan with a smug grin, seemingly impervious to the moral and ethical implications of his actions. Lenny followed reluctantly, the knot in his stomach growing tighter with every step. As they approached the open window of the sedan, the driver's composed exterior masked a deep-seated anxiety, his eyes flicking between the two officers as he braced himself for the encounter. "Is there a problem, officers?" the driver asked, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of wariness. Connor leaned in, closing the distance between himself and the driver with an intimidating presence. His voice was cold and demanding as he asked for the license and registration, his disdain barely concealed. "License and registration," he said, his tone laced with contempt. The driver, identified as DeAndre Johnson, complied without hesitation, though his hands trembled slightly as he handed over his documents. Lenny noticed the subtle signs of fear and vulnerability in DeAndre, his feelings of helplessness intensifying as he watched the scene unfold. "DeAndre Johnson," Connor read aloud, his lips curling into a sneer as he looked down at the driver. "And what exactly are you doing in this neighborhood, Mr. Johnson?" DeAndre's response was measured and composed, despite the evident strain. "I'm on my way to a meeting," he said, his voice steady but carrying a note of concern. "Is there a reason you pulled me over?" Connor's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "We ask the questions here. Step out of the vehicle." DeAndre hesitated, casting a brief, pleading look at Lenny, who could only look away in shame. Slowly, with a palpable sense of dread, DeAndre opened the car door and stepped out. The tension in the air was almost tangible, and Lenny's heart pounded with a mix of guilt and anxiety. He knew deep down that this situation was escalating beyond reason, but he felt trapped, unable to prevent the unfolding injustice. As Connor began his intrusive questioning, Lenny's mind raced with frantic thoughts, desperately searching for a way to de-escalate the situation before it spiraled out of control. He was acutely aware that this routine traffic stop was on the brink of becoming a life-changing event, and he struggled with the weight of his inaction, feeling a deep sense of responsibility for the impending consequences. Connor circled DeAndre's car like a predator closing in on its prey, his movements deliberate and menacing. His eyes, cold and unyielding, scanned every inch of the vehicle, searching for any pretext to escalate the situation. The sneer on his lips was a reflection of his disdain, as if he were taunting DeAndre with the very luxury that he had worked so hard to attain. "Nice car you've got here, Mr. Johnson," Connor said, his voice dripping with scorn. "How does someone like you afford something like this?" The words cut through the air, heavy with insinuation and prejudice. DeAndre, who had always taken pride in his hard work and the success it had brought him, felt a pang of injustice. He had achieved a great deal through dedication and perseverance, and now, confronted by Connor's venomous gaze and condescending tone, he felt his hard-earned pride being trampled on. DeAndre took a deep breath, fighting to keep his composure under the weight of Connor's hostility. His mind raced as he tried to process the situation. "I work hard for it," he said steadily. "I'm a financial officer, and I'm on my way to an important meeting. Can you tell me why I was stopped?" His voice was firm, but inside, he was seething. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was, being subjected to a baseless invasion of privacy. Connor, however, was impervious to DeAndre's attempts at clarity. His gaze lingered menacingly on the gun in his holster, a silent threat that loomed over them both. "Mind if we take a look inside your vehicle?" he asked, his tone dismissive of any notion of respect or fairness. DeAndre's response was measured but resolute. "I do mind. I haven't done anything wrong, and I do not consent to a search." His voice was laced with a sense of righteous indignation. The unfairness of the situation was overwhelming, and he could feel his heart pounding with a mix of fear and frustration. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Connor's face contorted into a mask of anger and suspicion. "Oh, so you've got something to hide, do you?" he sneered, the accusation hanging heavily in the air. Without further warning, Connor wrenched the car door open with a violent jerk and began rifling through the interior with an aggressive fervor. DeAndre took a step forward, intending to protest this blatant violation of his rights, but Lenny, a junior officer caught in the crossfire of his internal struggle, quickly intervened, placing himself between DeAndre and the enraged Connor. "Sir, please stay back," Lenny said, his voice trembling slightly with a mix of fear and determination. As Connor continued his invasive search, Lenny's heart raced with mounting anxiety. He discreetly reached into his pocket, pulled out a small bag of white powder, and placed it deliberately on the driver's seat. The act was both a betrayal and a shocking display of corruption. Lenny's stomach churned as he realized the gravity of what he was witnessing. This wasn't just racial profiling, it was a setup designed to frame an innocent man. As Connor emerged from the car, brandishing the bag of powder with a triumphant smirk, DeAndre's eyes widened in a mix of disbelief and horror. "That's not mine. You just planted that there," DeAndre protested, his voice trembling with a mix of desperation and anger. Connor's grin was one of malicious satisfaction. "Looks like we've got ourselves a drug dealer," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're under arrest." His hand reached for the handcuffs with a swift, practiced motion, the metal gleaming ominously. DeAndre's facade finally shattered under the weight of the false accusation. "This is ridiculous, I'm telling you. That's not mine," he said, his voice breaking with frustration and despair. The magnitude of the injustice was too much to bear, and he felt a deep sense of betrayal. Lenny, observing the scene with growing horror, felt a wave of sickness wash over him. He was witnessing an egregious abuse of power, a perversion of the very principles of justice he had sworn to uphold. His father's words echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder of the integrity he was now being called upon to defend. A real officer protects and serves all people, son, not just those who look like us. The tension in the air was thick with the weight of impending conflict. DeAndre, fully comprehending the gravity of the situation, turned to Lenny with eyes filled with pleading and hope. "Officer, you saw what happened. Please tell him this isn't right." Connor's gaze snapped to Lenny with a fierce glare. "Don't listen to him, rookie. This is how we clean up the streets." Lenny was paralyzed, caught in a profound internal struggle between his loyalty to his partner and his moral obligation to seek justice. The weight of the moment was crushing, pressing him to make a choice that could alter his career and his very sense of self. As Connor moved to secure DeAndre in handcuffs, the situation hung precariously on the edge, teetering between the potential for justice and the ruin of an innocent man's life through unchecked prejudice and corruption. Time seemed to slow as Lenny watched Connor's hand inch towards the handcuffs. A torrent of memories surged through him: his father's proud smile at his police academy graduation, the stories of honor and integrity that had shaped his upbringing, and the solemn oath he had taken to uphold justice. Each memory was a reminder of the values he had sworn to protect. "Stop!" Lenny's voice rang out, surprising even himself with its firm conviction. Connor froze mid-motion, his hand suspended in the air, disbelief etched on his face. "What did you say, rookie?" Connor asked, his tone laced with incredulity and irritation. Lenny stepped forward, placing himself firmly between his partner and DeAndre. His heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination, but his resolve solidified with every passing second. "I said stop, Officer Connor. This isn't right, and you know it." Connor's face contorted into a snarl of rage. "Listen here, you little punk. I've been on this force longer than you've been alive. You can't tell me what's right or wrong." His words were a chilling reminder of the arrogance and entitlement that had led to this moment of moral reckoning. "Maybe not," Lenny replied, his voice unwavering and filled with an earnest resolve. He stood firm, his stance embodying the gravity of the situation. "But I know what I saw. You planted that evidence. This man is innocent." The weight of his words hung heavily in the air, a stark contrast to the mounting tension around him. He felt the intense pressure of the moment, every beat of his heart echoing the moral clarity he had found within himself. It was as though the truth had become a palpable force, urging him to stand up against the corruption he had uncovered. The sheer determination in Lenny's eyes spoke volumes about his commitment to justice, an unwavering beacon in the storm of deceit and intimidation. DeAndre, still tense and visibly distressed, now showed a glimmer of hope. The fear that had been etched on his face began to give way to a faint but significant light of relief. He observed the confrontation with a mix of anxiety and anticipation, clinging to the hope that Lenny's courage might turn the tide. His silence was filled with unspoken gratitude and desperation, as if he were silently pleading for justice to prevail. The reality of his predicament seemed to soften slightly, replaced by a flicker of optimism that maybe, just maybe, the right thing could still be done. Connor's voice dropped to a menacing growl, laden with an ominous threat. "You're making a big mistake, kid. I can end your career right here and now. Is that what you want?" His words were like a dark cloud, looming over the confrontation and threatening to choke out the glimmer of hope Lenny had ignited. The intensity in Connor's tone was palpable, a cruel reminder of the power he wielded and the consequences Lenny faced. The threat was not just professional intimidation, it was a stark challenge to Lenny's very identity and values, striking at the core of his deepest aspirations and fears. For a fleeting second, a shadow of doubt crept into Lenny's mind, casting a veil of uncertainty over his steadfast resolve. His dream of becoming a police officer, a dream he had nurtured and cherished for so long, now seemed to hang precariously in the balance. The thought of throwing away everything he had worked for was almost unbearable. Yet, as he glanced at DeAndre, the raw fear and desperation in the man's eyes reminded him of the greater cost of compromising his principles. It was a poignant moment of clarity, a stark realization that true integrity often demands the highest personal sacrifice. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. If standing up for what's right means losing my job, then so be it, Lenny declared with a fiery determination that left no room for doubt. "I won't be a part of this." His voice carried a resonance of unwavering conviction, a powerful declaration of his commitment to justice over personal gain. The decision was not just about the risk to his career, it was a profound statement of his values, a testament to his refusal to be complicit in wrongdoing. Lenny's courage illuminated the darkness of corruption, a beacon of hope in a world where integrity seemed increasingly scarce. Connor's face flushed with a deep, incandescent rage, his anger visibly boiling over. His features contorted in fury as he jabbed a finger into Lenny's chest, each motion an aggressive punctuation to his threats. "You're finished, you hear me? I'll make sure you never wear a badge again." The venom in his words was a reflection of his crumbling authority, a desperate attempt to salvage control through intimidation. The intensity of his anger was not just a personal affront, it was a manifestation of the systemic corruption he sought to protect, an all-consuming rage that sought to crush Lenny's brave stand. Lenny remained resolute, his voice steady and unshaken amidst the storm of hostility. "Go ahead, but I'm not moving, and you're not arresting this man on false charges." His words were imbued with a calm strength, a refusal to be swayed by fear or threats. He stood as a pillar of integrity, his resolve an unyielding force against the tide of corruption. The quiet confidence in his stance was a powerful counterpoint to the chaos around him, a clear declaration that he would not falter in the face of adversity. The air between Lenny and Connor crackled with palpable tension, a heavy, almost oppressive atmosphere that seemed to press down on everyone present. The scene was charged with an almost physical energy, the conflict between them a stark and vivid portrayal of moral and ethical struggle. As cars passed by, their drivers slowed, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. The sense of anticipation in the air was almost tangible, a collective breath held as the confrontation reached its climax. Desperate to resolve the escalating standoff, DeAndre decided to reveal a crucial piece of information, his voice calm but imbued with authority. "Officers," he said, "I think there's something you both need to know." His words carried a weight of revelation, a hint of the significant shift that was about to occur. The calm in his tone contrasted sharply with the intensity of the moment, a deliberate effort to de-escalate the situation and bring a semblance of order to the chaos. Connor's sneer was a sharp, dismissive response to DeAndre's attempt at intervention. Save it for the judge, his dismissal was a reflection of his fear and desperation, a refusal to acknowledge the growing threat to his position and actions. The arrogance in his tone masked a deep-seated anxiety, a trembling facade of control that was beginning to crack under the pressure of DeAndre's revelation. But DeAndre pressed on, his voice unwavering as he introduced himself. "I'm Captain DeAndre Johnson, the new head of your precinct." The announcement was a seismic shift in the dynamics of the confrontation, the weight of his position lending a new gravity to the situation. The revelation was met with stunned silence, the impact of his words resonating deeply with both officers. Connor's face went pale, his earlier bravado evaporating as he grappled with the reality of his mistake. Lenny's eyes widened in shock, the realization dawning on him with a mix of surprise and vindication. "That's impossible," Connor stammered, his confidence shattered beyond repair. The disbelief in his voice was a testament to the profound impact of DeAndre's revelation, a stark contrast to his earlier arrogance. The sudden shift in the balance of power was palpable, the tension in the air giving way to a new sense of urgency and consequence. DeAndre's hand moved deliberately as he reached into his jacket, his actions drawing the attention of both officers. He withdrew his badge and ID with measured calm, a clear statement of his authority and legitimacy. "I was en route to headquarters to meet with the commissioner when you stopped me." The simple act of revealing his credentials was a powerful gesture, a clear affirmation of his position and the seriousness of the situation. Lenny took the badge with a sense of gravity, examining it closely before handing it to Connor. The older officer's hands trembled as he realized the magnitude of his error, his earlier bravado replaced by a dawning realization of the gravity of his actions. The sight of the badge was a stark reminder of the authority and integrity that had been so blatantly violated. I didn't know," Connor muttered, his voice barely audible as his confidence crumbled. The admission was a raw, vulnerable moment, a stark contrast to his earlier arrogance. It was a moment of reckoning, a realization of the profound consequences of his actions. DeAndre's eyes hardened with a steely resolve. "Would it have made a difference if you did? Every citizen deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their position or the color of their skin." His words were a powerful condemnation of the corruption and injustice that had been exposed, a clear statement of the principles that should guide every action and decision. The emphasis on respect and dignity was a poignant reminder of the values that had been so grossly violated. Desperate to salvage the situation, Connor began to backpedal, his attempt at justification a feeble response to the overwhelming evidence of his wrongdoing. "Captain, I can explain. See, we've had reports of drug trafficking in this area." "Stop," DeAndre cut him off sharply, his voice a commanding force. "I saw you plant those drugs in my car, officer." The directness of his words was a clear rejection of Connor's attempts to deflect responsibility, a decisive affirmation of the truth that had been revealed. Turning to Lenny, DeAndre offered a nod of apology. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "Lenny, sir." "Lenny Thompson," Officer Lenny responded, his voice steady and filled with quiet pride. The introduction was a formal acknowledgement of his role in the unfolding drama, a testament to his unwavering commitment to justice and integrity. "Thompson, you saw it too, didn't you?" DeAndre's voice carried a weight of urgency that cut through the mounting tension, his eyes searching Lenny's face for confirmation. Lenny, his own emotions a turbulent mix of relief and steely determination, met DeAndre's gaze with a solemn nod. "Yes, sir, I did." The words were simple, but they carried the gravity of a momentous truth. Lenny's confession was not just a declaration of what he had witnessed, it was an act of courage, standing against the tide of corruption and deceit that had sullied their profession. Connor's reaction was swift and brutal, his face contorting into a mask of fury and disbelief. The years of trust he had built with Lenny seemed to crumble in an instant, replaced by a visceral rage. "You little rat. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? You're going to side with him." His voice was laced with a mix of betrayal and anger, each word a sharp accusation. The bitterness in Connor's tone was not just about Lenny's choice, it was about the collapse of his own carefully constructed facade, the unraveling of his control. Lenny stood firm, his resolve unshaken by Connor's venomous outburst. "I'm not siding with anyone. I'm siding with the truth." His voice was steady, yet it carried an underlying strength that spoke of moral clarity and unyielding integrity. Lenny's words were a beacon of honesty in a sea of deceit, a declaration that truth would not be buried under layers of corruption and lies. DeAndre stepped in with authority, his presence a bulwark against Connor's fury. "That's enough, Officer Connor. Your actions today have not only breached department policy but also broken the law. Effective immediately, you are suspended. Hand over your badge and leave." The calm firmness of DeAndre's voice contrasted sharply with Connor's chaotic anger. It was a moment of reckoning, where the scales of justice were being balanced and the weight of Connor's misdeeds was finally coming to light. Connor's face twisted into a grimace of disbelief and rage. "You can't do this to me. I've devoted 20 years of my life to this force. I've given everything." His voice cracked with a mix of desperation and indignation, the years of dedication he claimed now seeming hollow in the face of his exposed corruption. The bitterness of his words was tinged with a realization that his legacy was being dismantled before his eyes. DeAndre's voice dropped, carrying a quiet but piercing intensity. "And in those 20 years, how many innocent lives have you ruined? How many people have suffered because of your prejudice?" The questions were not just rhetorical, they were a direct challenge to Connor's conscience. They hung in the air, heavy with the gravity of countless injustices and the suffering endured by those affected by Connor's actions. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The impact of DeAndre's questions seemed to crush Connor, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his wrongdoings had become too much to bear. The realization of his actions and their profound consequences settled over him like a shroud, and the anger in his eyes gave way to a dawning, crushing despair. It was a moment of raw vulnerability, where the facade of authority and control crumbled, leaving behind only stark truth of his betrayal. As DeAndre called for backup, the scene had become a spectacle. A small crowd had gathered, their phones held aloft, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. What had started as a routine confrontation was quickly transforming into a viral sensation, a story of corruption and injustice that was about to captivate the city. The crowd's growing energy was a reflection of the collective outrage and anticipation, a tangible force that mirrored the intensity of the confrontation. Lenny, still reeling from the intensity of the situation, turned to DeAndre with a look of remorse. "Sir, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I should have come forward earlier." His voice was filled with regret and self-reproach, a heartfelt apology for the delay in his actions. Lenny's acknowledgement of his hesitation was a testament to his internal struggle and the courage it took to finally stand up for what was right. DeAndre placed a reassuring hand on Lenny's shoulder, his touch a gesture of support and understanding. "You did the right thing when it mattered most, Officer Thompson. That's what counts. His words were a balm to Lenny's wounded conscience, a recognition of the bravery it took to speak the truth, despite the personal cost. The reassurance was not just about Lenny's actions, but about the affirmation of his moral integrity in the face of overwhelming adversity. As they awaited reinforcements, both men knew that the moment was just the beginning of a much larger confrontation. The revelation of Captain Johnson's true identity was setting the stage for a reckoning that would force the department and the city to confront deep-seated issues of racism and corruption. The realization of the scale of the challenge ahead was a weighty one, but it was also a beacon of hope for a future where justice and integrity might prevail. The small crowd of onlookers continued to swell, their curiosity turned into a fervent engagement. The street, once a quiet suburban lane, had transformed into an impromptu stage for a drama that was about to resonate across the city. The growing crowd, with their phones raised high, were not just passive observers but active participants in a moment of significant public reckoning. Amidst the rising noise and energy, someone in the crowd whispered loudly, "Hey, isn't that the new police captain?" The realization spread like wildfire, and soon the crowd was shouting in support of DeAndre and Lenny, their voices rising in a chorus of solidarity and anger. "Justice for Captain Johnson. Arrest the crooked cop. We're with you, Captain." The chants became a powerful expression of collective outrage and hope for justice, a rallying cry for change. Connor, surrounded by the swelling crowd and the overwhelming sense of exposure, looked around in a mix of fear and disbelief. The realization that he was not just outnumbered but also completely exposed to public scrutiny was palpable. The gravity of his situation was made all the more vivid by the intense reaction of the crowd, whose voices became a powerful backdrop to his unraveling world. Amid the clamor and chaos, a small, clear voice cut through the noise. "Dad," the simple, heart-wrenching call came from the backseat of DeAndre's car, where his 10-year-old son Marcus had been an unnoticed witness to the unfolding drama. Marcus's wide, fearful eyes peered out from the car, reflecting the confusion and anxiety that the scene had provoked. DeAndre's heart ached with deep paternal sorrow, realizing that amid his professional struggle, he had inadvertently exposed his son to a harsh reality he had tried so hard to shield him from. "It's okay," Marcus, DeAndre called out, striving to keep his voice steady and comforting. "Everything's going to be fine. Stay in the car, okay?" His attempt to reassure his son was tinged with a profound sense of guilt and helplessness as he faced the emotional weight of a situation that had intersected so painfully with his family life. The moment was a stark reminder of the personal costs embedded in his quest for justice, and DeAndre's heart was heavy with the emotional burden of balancing his professional integrity with his responsibilities as a father. Marcus nodded in understanding, his gaze unwaveringly fixed on Connor, who was now retreating from the growing crowd, his movements betraying a mix of anxiety and desperation. Lenny, sensing the escalating tension and driven by an instinctive need to protect, swiftly moved to place himself between the patrol car and Connor. His protective stance was a silent declaration of his refusal to let the situation spiral further into chaos. As the scene grew more tumultuous, local news vans began to arrive, their flashing lights cutting through the evening gloom, attracted by the rapid spread of the social media frenzy. Reporters, their voices sharp and urgent, pushed through the throng of spectators, their questions flying like arrows aimed at the heart of the unfolding drama. "Captain Johnson, can you comment on what's happening here? Officer, are you being wrongfully detained? Is this a case of racial profiling gone wrong?" DeAndre, the target of the media's barrage, raised his hands in an attempt to impose some order. His voice, though steady, carried a note of exhaustion. "Please, everyone step back. This is an ongoing police matter. We'll address all questions in due time." His words were met with a chorus of dissatisfaction. The crowd, energized by years of unresolved grievances and police misconduct, began to share their own stories of mistreatment and prejudice. Each personal account seemed to amplify the collective anger, turning the air electric with frustration and a yearning for justice. Connor, overwhelmed and rattled by the turn of events, made a frantic dash toward his patrol car, his movements erratic and desperate. "This is all a misunderstanding," he shouted, his voice cracking with the strain of a crumbling facade. "I was just doing my job." Yet his protestations only fueled the crowd's rage, and their chants of "no justice, no peace" grew louder, echoing down the street like a powerful, rhythmic drumbeat of dissent. Seeing the situation rapidly deteriorated, Lenny grabbed his radio with trembling hands, his voice urgent as he requested additional units. "We need additional units for crowd control at our location. The situation is tense but currently non-violent. His words were barely audible over the cacophony of shouting and the blaring of sirens in the distance. DeAndre, caught between his roles as a father, a police captain, and a black man grappling with injustice, took a deep, steadying breath. He knew that his next actions would be pivotal, shaping not just the resolution of this incident, but also his future in the department and the community's trust in law enforcement. The approaching sirens grew louder, a stark reminder that this was no longer just a traffic stop, but a critical moment that could redefine relationships and expectations. As the first patrol car skidded to a halt, its tires screeching against the pavement, 2 officers jumped out, their hands hovering near their holsters. They surveyed the chaotic scene with confusion and apprehension, taking in the angry crowd, the cornered Connor, and DeAndre standing resolutely at the center of it all. "What's going on here?" demanded Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior officer of the newly arrived backup. His authoritative voice cut through the tumult, demanding clarity amid the chaos. Out of breath and with adrenaline coursing through him, Lenny began to explain, his words tumbling out in a rush. "We've got a situation. Officer Connor conducted an illegal stop and tried to plant evidence. The man he stopped is Captain Johnson, our new precinct leader." Rodriguez's eyes widened in disbelief, struggling to process the gravity of the accusation. "You're serious?" If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Meanwhile, Connor, realizing that his opportunity to escape justice was slipping through his fingers, made a desperate move. He lunged for the bag of drugs he had planted, intending to destroy the evidence of his misconduct. "He's going for the drug," someone in the crowd shouted, the alarm spreading like wildfire. DeAndre, ever vigilant, reacted with a swift and decisive action. His years of training and experience enabled him to tackle Connor to the ground with impressive speed and precision, pinning him firmly. "Officer Connor, you're under arrest," DeAndre declared, his voice resonating with authority and resolve. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The crowd, witnessing the culmination of their frustrations, erupted into applause. The sound of clapping and cheers mingled with the blare of approaching sirens as Sergeant Rodriguez rushed over to assist with the arrest. Lenny, feeling a wave of relief, stepped forward to offer his support. As Connor was handcuffed and escorted to a patrol car, he began shouting with defiant rage, "This is a setup. You can't do this to me. I have rights." His protests were drowned out by the now dominant chants of the crowd, whose voices carried a mix of triumph and continued demand for justice. DeAndre, maintaining his composure amidst the swirling chaos, turned to address the gathering of officers and civilians. "Everyone, please remain calm. The situation is now under control. We will be conducting a full investigation into today's events, and I assure you justice will be served." His words, though delivered with a calm exterior, carried the weight of a promise to restore order and accountability. The newly arrived officers, still grappling with the unfolding drama, began the process of dispersing the crowd. News cameras captured every dramatic moment, the lens focusing on the intersection of law, race, and justice. As the chaos began to subside, Lenny approached DeAndre, his heart still racing but filled with a sense of purpose. "Sir, I want you to know I'm prepared to give a full statement about what I witnessed today." DeAndre nodded, a look of respect and gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Officer Thompson. Your integrity today is exactly what this department needs." As the scene gradually returned to a semblance of order, DeAndre remembered his son. With a sense of urgency, he ran back to his car and opened the back door, his heart aching with concern. "Marcus, are you okay?" he asked, his voice tender but tinged with worry. Marcus, wide-eyed and trembling with fear, nodded. "Dad, what's going to happen now?" His question was a poignant reminder of the personal stakes and the uncertain future that lay ahead, both for his father and for the community caught in the aftermath of the day's events. DeAndre pulled his son into a tight embrace, the intensity of the moment reflected in their shared hug. "We're going to make things right. That's what I've been fighting for, son. That's why my job is so important," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. The weight of the day's events pressed heavily on his shoulders, but in this moment of vulnerability, he found solace and strength in the bond with his child. Their embrace was more than just a gesture, it was a promise to confront the injustices that had unfolded and to seek a path toward redemption and justice. As father and son held each other, Sergeant Rodriguez approached Captain DeAndre Johnson with a sense of urgency. "The press is asking for a statement. and the commissioner is on his way," he said, his tone a mixture of professionalism and concern. DeAndre took a deep breath, acutely aware that the real battle was just beginning. The arrest of Officer Connor was merely the first step in a much larger struggle to address the systemic issues plaguing the department. DeAndre's gaze swept over the diverse crowd of citizens, their faces reflecting a spectrum of emotions: curiosity, anticipation, hope. His resolve hardened as he squared his shoulders, understanding that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Yet for the first time in a long while, there was a glimmer of hope that real, substantive change was within reach. Reinforcements arrived, not just in the form of additional officers, but as a testament to an awakening community ready to stand up for justice. The arrival of these reinforcements symbolized more than just increased manpower. It represented a collective will to confront the deep-seated corruption and biases that had long tainted the department. The real work was about to begin, and the presence of the community was a powerful affirmation of the desire for accountability and reform. As the scene began to stabilize, the air remained thick with palpable tension. The commissioner's car pulled up, its lights flashing like beacons in the dusk. Commissioner Holt, a stern-faced man in his 60s, stepped out of the vehicle, his expression a complex blend of concern, irritation, and resolve. "Captain Johnson," he called out, striding purposefully toward DeAndre. "What in God's name is going on here?" His voice carried the weight of authority and the urgency of the situation. DeAndre stood tall, meeting the commissioner's gaze with unwavering resolve. "Sir, we had an incident involving Officer Connor. He conducted an illegal stop and attempted to plant evidence," DeAndre reported, his voice steady despite the gravity of the accusations. He could feel the eyes of the crowd and the press on him, and the burden of ensuring that justice prevailed pressed heavily on his shoulders. Holt's eyebrows shot up in shock. "Those are serious accusations, Captain. Do you have proof?" His tone was a mix of skepticism and concern, reflecting the gravity of the allegations. "I do." Lenny stepped forward, his voice steady but tinged with nerves. "I witnessed the entire incident, sir. Officer Connor planted drugs in Captain Johnson's vehicle." His statement was a critical piece of the puzzle, and it marked a turning point in the unfolding drama. The commissioner's gaze shifted between DeAndre, Lenny, and the patrol car where Connor sat, his face a mask of anger and fear. "This is a nightmare," Holt muttered, his voice barely audible, before turning to address the crowd with a louder, authoritative tone. "All right, I want statements from everyone involved, and somebody gets these news cameras out of here." His command was an attempt to regain control over the rapidly escalating situation. But it was too late. The story had already spread like wildfire on social media. Smartphones had captured every moment, documenting Connor's fall from grace as he was led from the patrol car to face the commissioner. The images and videos were already fueling a fervent public discourse. "This is all a misunderstanding," Connor shouted, his composure finally cracking under the weight of the evidence and the mounting pressure. "You can't seriously believe this. He's a rookie, and this guy just showed up claiming to be the captain." His protests were a desperate attempt to deflect blame and save face, but they rang hollow in the face of the mounting evidence against him. DeAndre stepped forward, his badge gleaming in the sunlight, a symbol of his authority and commitment to justice. "I am Captain Johnson," he declared firmly, "and today the truth will be known." His statement was not just a declaration of his identity, but a promise to hold those accountable who had betrayed the principles of justice. The crowd, momentarily silenced by the commissioner's arrival, began to murmur again. The cries of justice and "lock him up" echoed among the gathered onlookers, a reflection of the community's desire for accountability and reform. Commissioner Holt raised his hands, calling for silence to address the situation with the gravity it demanded. "This situation will be handled according to protocol," Commissioner Holt said, his voice firm and authoritative. "Officer Connor, you are suspended pending a full investigation. I need a complete report on my desk by tomorrow morning." His words were a step toward justice, but also a reminder of the bureaucratic process that would follow. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 5 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Connor's face twisted into a mask of rage and disbelief. "Is this how you're going to treat me, Holt? After all these years, you know how things work on the streets. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to get results." His admission was a shocking revelation of his deep-seated cynicism and disregard for the law. A hush fell over the crowd. Even those who had been shouting for Connor's arrest were taken aback by his brazen admission. DeAndre stepped closer to Connor, his voice low but cutting through the sudden silence. "The rules aren't meant to be broken, Connor. They're meant to protect everyone, including the officers who uphold them. Your actions today, and apparently for years before, not only violated the law but also eroded the trust between the police and the community we swore to protect. Lenny, encouraged by DeAndre's words, found his voice. "Sir," he addressed the commissioner, "I'm ready to give a full statement on today's events and other incidents I've witnessed during my time with Officer Connor." His decision to come forward was an act of courage, a step towards transparency and accountability. Connor, his rage uncontrollable, lunged at Lenny, his face flushed with fury. "You rat!" His outburst was a final, desperate act of defiance. In response, several officers rushed to restrain Connor, who continued to shout threats and obscenities. Commissioner Holt nodded to the officers. "You get him out of here and make sure he's charged with attempted assault on an officer, among other things." As Connor was dragged away, his cries of protest fading into the distance, DeAndre turned to face the crowd. His voice, though tired, was resolute. "I know many of you have lost faith in law enforcement. What happened here today is inexcusable, but I promise you that under my leadership, we will root out corruption, confront racial bias, and work tirelessly to rebuild trust in our community." His words were a solemn vow, a commitment to restore integrity and justice in the face of the day's tumultuous events. The crowd's angry shouts slowly morphed into cautious applause, their initial outrage giving way to a hesitant, yet significant, acknowledgement of the shift in momentum. It wasn't a full endorsement, nor was it a resounding victory, but it was a start, a fragile, hopeful beginning. As the scene began to disperse, DeAndre's gaze met Lenny's across the throng of people. The young officer stood a little taller, the weight of the day's events settling into a profound sense of fulfillment. Despite the daunting challenges that lay ahead, today's stand against corruption has proven that change was not only possible but within reach, one courageous act at a time. The confrontation may have concluded, but the real journey of reforming the department and mending the fractures within the community was just beginning. The incident had ripped away the veil obscuring years of systemic problems within the police force. Connor, once a figure of authority and intimidation, now found himself stripped of his badge and gun, confined within the cold, unyielding walls of a cell. The transformation from the arrogant officer he had been mere days earlier to a man facing the consequences of his actions was stark and sobering. His indictment had ignited a media frenzy, with protesters rallying outside the courthouse, their voices demanding justice and accountability. Inside the courtroom, the facade of righteousness that Connor had so carefully constructed began to crumble as the mounting evidence exposed the truth of his misconduct. Lenny's testimony was a critical piece of the puzzle, a first-hand account of the attempted setup that underscored the gravity of Connor's betrayal. What followed was a powerful testament to the ripple effects of Lenny's bravery. Inspired by his courage, other officers emerged from the shadows, sharing their own stories of Connor's long history of misconduct. The revelations of racial profiling, abuse of power, and systemic corruption were laid bare for all to see. Each new disclosure sent shockwaves through both the department and the community, shattering long-held illusions of justice and fairness. "Your Honor," the prosecutor addressed the judge with a voice that was both somber and resolute. "What we have here is not just an isolated incident, but a pattern of behavior that has eroded the very foundation of trust between law enforcement and the citizens they are sworn to protect." The prosecutor's words resonated deeply, encapsulating the broader implications of Connor's actions and highlighting the urgent need for systemic change. Connor's defense attorney attempted to frame him as a relic struggling to adapt to evolving standards, but the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. As the judge prepared to announce the verdict, DeAndre sat in the gallery, his expression a mask of calm determination that belied the tumultuous emotions roiling beneath the surface. Beside him, Lenny shifted nervously, the gravity of his testimony weighing heavily on his shoulders, each moment a reminder of the personal sacrifice he had made for the sake of justice. "Officer Connor," the judge began, her voice firm, "your actions not only broke the law but betrayed the trust placed in you by this community. You used your position of authority to intimidate and discriminate rather than to protect and serve." Her words were a powerful condemnation, a reflection of the deep-seated betrayal felt by the community and the moral failings exposed by the trial. The courtroom held its breath as the judge continued, her voice steady and resolute. "Therefore, I find you guilty on all counts. You are sentenced to 5 years in prison with no possibility of parole for 3 years. Additionally, you are permanently barred from holding any law enforcement position." The verdict was a seismic shift, a decisive moment that marked the end of Connor's reign of corruption and the beginning of a new chapter for the community. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom, followed by a mixture of cheers and shocked murmurs. Connor, his face ashen and devoid of the arrogance that once defined him, was led away in handcuffs, his silence a stark contrast to his previous defiance. Outside the courthouse, DeAndre addressed the waiting press and concerned citizens with a voice that was both firm and resolute. "Today, justice was served," he began, his tone carrying the weight of the momentous occasion. "But this is just the beginning. We have a long road ahead to rebuild trust and ensure that what happened with Officer Connor never happens again." His words were a clarion call for ongoing commitment and reform, a recognition of the challenges ahead, and a pledge to address the deep-rooted issues exposed by the trial. He turned to Lenny, who stood nearby, still processing the magnitude of the day's events. Officers like Lenny Thompson, who dared to stand up for what is right, represent the future of our department. Moving forward, we will foster a culture of accountability and integrity. DeAndre's acknowledgement was a powerful affirmation of Lenny's bravery and commitment to transforming the department's ethos. As the crowd began to disperse, a mixture of hope and skepticism hung in the air. Connor's downfall was a significant victory, but it also exposed deep-seated issues that wouldn't be resolved overnight. DeAndre and Lenny shared a meaningful look, a silent understanding passing between them. Both knew that the real work was just beginning. The task of rebuilding the department from the ground up was daunting, but they were steadfast in their commitment to seeing it through. As they made their way back to their patrol car, DeAndre placed a reassuring hand on Lenny's shoulder. "You did well, Thompson. Your father would be proud." The gesture was both personal and profound, a recognition of Lenny's bravery and a nod to the legacy of integrity that had guided his actions. Lenny nodded, a small, resolute smile forming on his lips. For the first time since joining the force, he felt he was truly living up to the ideals that had inspired him to become a police officer. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but there was a renewed sense of purpose and hope. Connor's downfall marked the end of an era but also heralded the beginning of a new chapter. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but with leaders like DeAndre and officers like Lenny, there was a flicker of hope for lasting change and a more just and equitable future. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 6 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. In the weeks following Connor's conviction, the police department underwent a dramatic transformation. Captain DeAndre Johnson, now firmly established in his role, was tireless in implementing comprehensive reforms. The precinct buzzed with activity as DeAndre called a general meeting, his presence a symbol of the new direction the department was taking. Officers entered the briefing room with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension, their faces reflecting the uncertainty and hope of a new era. At the front of the room, DeAndre stood with Lenny by his side, their unity a testament to the strength of their shared vision. DeAndre began speaking with a commanding authority and warmth that resonated deeply. "We're at a crossroads," he declared, his voice echoing with conviction. "The events of the past few weeks have shaken our department to its core, but from this crisis comes an opportunity. An opportunity to rebuild, to do better, to truly serve and protect all members of our community." He outlined his ambitious plan with clarity and resolved mandatory bias training for all officers, the establishment of a civilian oversight committee, the implementation of body cameras for every patrol, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. As he spoke, some officers shifted uncomfortably, their resistance a reflection of the deep-seated changes being proposed, while others nodded in approval, recognizing the necessity of the reforms. "I know change isn't easy," DeAndre continued, his tone both empathetic and resolute, "but it's necessary. We owe it to ourselves and to the community we serve." His words were a call to action, a powerful reminder of the responsibility each officer carried and the collective effort required to restore trust and integrity within the department. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but DeAndre's leadership and Lenny's bravery offered a glimmer of hope for a future defined by accountability and respect. When the meeting concluded, Lenny found himself enveloped by a mix of congratulations and questions from his fellow officers. Some approached with heartfelt praise for his bravery, their faces alight with admiration and gratitude. Others sought his advice, eager to navigate the shifting dynamics within the department now that the landscape had irrevocably changed. Lenny's heart swelled with a complex blend of pride and apprehension. He had become a symbol of courage and integrity in a time of profound upheaval. Outside, in the community, The atmosphere was cautiously optimistic. DeAndre, ever committed to mending the frayed relationship between the police and the public, threw himself into the task with relentless energy. He attended community events, town halls, and local basketball games, determined to bridge the gap and restore trust. His efforts were a testament to his belief that healing could only come through genuine, heartfelt engagement with the community. One evening, as Lenny was finishing up his patrol shift, he noticed a familiar face at a nearby park. It was Marcus, DeAndre's young son, engrossed in a spirited game of basketball with his friends. Lenny decided to stop, feeling a surge of both nostalgia and connection. He parked his car and approached the game with a friendly wave. "Hey Marcus," he called out, his voice warm and inviting. "Mind if I join?" The boy looked up, momentarily startled, then nodded with a hesitant but hopeful smile. As Lenny joined the game, other neighborhood kids quickly followed suit, their excitement palpable. Laughter and shouts filled the air as the game evolved into a joyful, impromptu event. The simple pleasure of running up and down the court, of scoring a basket and high-fiving a teammate, was a welcome escape from the complexities of their everyday lives. DeAndre arrived to pick up Marcus and was greeted by the heartwarming sight of his son and the local kids enjoying the game with Lenny. A smile broke across DeAndre's face, a rare moment of reprieve from his intense responsibilities. He joined in the game, letting the laughter and camaraderie of the moment lift the weight of his duties from his shoulders. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the park, DeAndre gathered everyone together. With a look of genuine pride, he addressed the group. "This," he said, gesturing to the diverse mix of kids and adults, "is what community policing looks like. It's about being part of the neighborhood, not just policing it." Lenny nodded, his heart swelling with a profound sense of fulfillment. The smile on his face was a reflection of why he had chosen to become a police officer, not to enforce laws blindly, but to be a positive and compassionate presence within his community. In the months that followed, the results of their efforts became increasingly evident. Crime rates began to drop, and more importantly, the community's trust in the police force began to rebuild. It wasn't a perfect transformation. Challenges and setbacks remained, but the progress was undeniable. A year after the tumultuous events that had sparked this transformation, DeAndre stood before the graduating class of the police academy. Lenny, now a decorated officer and mentor to recruits, watched from the front row, his pride evident. DeAndre's address to the graduates was a powerful reminder of the ideals they were expected to uphold. "You are entering a noble profession at a critical time," he said with conviction. "Your job is not just to enforce the laws, but to build trust, serve with compassion, and always stand up for what is right, even when it's hard." As the new officers received their badges, the air was thick with hope and determination. The department had undergone a period of deep self-reflection and reform, emerging stronger, more transparent, and more connected to the community it served. DeAndre and Lenny exchanged a knowing glance, both aware that while significant progress had been made, the journey toward justice and integrity was far from complete. 2 years had passed since the day of Connor's arrest, and under DeAndre's leadership, the police department had made considerable strides in reforming its practices and rebuilding community trust. However, the shadow of the past still loomed, particularly with Connor's upcoming appeal hearing. The courtroom was a hive of activity, with media teams camped outside, and a mix of supporters and protesters filling the streets. Inside, DeAndre and Lenny sat in the gallery, their presence a silent testament to the significance of the proceedings. Connor, once a figure of arrogant authority, now appeared defeated and anxious as he was brought into the courtroom. His eyes, once confident and defiant, now darted nervously around the room. His attorney argued passionately for a reduced sentence, appealing to Connor's long service record and portraying him as a victim of a flawed system. When it was the prosecution's turn, their arguments were uncompromising. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began with a tone of resolute conviction, "Mr. Connor's actions were not isolated incidents, nor were they merely the result of systemic flaws. They were deliberate abuses of power that caused significant harm and eroded public trust." The courtroom was riveted as evidence was presented, revealing the extent of Connor's misconduct. Testimonies from individuals whose lives had been shattered by his actions painted a harrowing picture: families torn apart by false arrests, careers ruined by planted evidence, and a community that had lived in constant fear of those sworn to protect them. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 7 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Lenny took the stand once more, his voice steady and unwavering as he recounted not only the specific incident involving DeAndre but also other instances of misconduct he had witnessed during his time as Connor's partner. His testimony was a crucial piece in illustrating the broader pattern of abuse that had plagued their department. When DeAndre took the stand, he spoke with a blend of authority and personal pain. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his leadership and personal experience. "The damage caused by Mr. Connor extends beyond individual cases. It fostered a culture of distrust that we are still working tirelessly to overcome. Our community deserves justice, not just for one incident, but for the years of systemic abuse that have impacted countless lives." As the hearing progressed, it became evident that this was not merely about the fate of one man, but about holding accountable those who abused their power. It was a message to everyone that no one was above the law, especially those entrusted to uphold it. When the judge rendered the decision, the courtroom fell silent. "Mr. Connor," the judge said, "having reviewed all the evidence and testimony, I find no reason to reduce your sentence. Furthermore, in light of the additional evidence presented, I am extending your original sentence by 2 years. You will serve a total of 7 years with no possibility of parole for 5 years. A collective sigh of relief and justice swept through the courtroom. Connor slumped in his chair, the last remnants of his arrogance and defiance dissolving into resignation. Outside the courthouse, DeAndre addressed the crowd that had gathered. "Today, justice has been served, not just for me, but for every member of our community who has suffered due to abuses of power. Let this also serve as a reminder that our work is far from finished. We must remain vigilant, hold ourselves accountable, and continue to fight for a system that truly serves and protects everyone, regardless of their race or background." His words resonated deeply, a reaffirmation of the commitment to justice and reform. As the crowd began to disperse, Lenny approached DeAndre with a question that had been on his mind. "Do you think this will make a difference, sir?" DeAndre nodded thoughtfully. "It's a start, Lenny. It sends a message that times have changed and that we are committed to doing better. But real, lasting change comes from what we do every day on the streets." In our interactions with the community, they walked together towards the patrol car, their steps filled with purpose and resolve. The road ahead was still long, but with each act of integrity and courage, they were forging a path toward a more just and equitable system. As they drove away, the setting sun cast long shadows across the city, a poignant reminder that while darkness may persist, each new day brings with it the promise of redemption, justice, and hope for a better tomorrow. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you found this content enlightening and thought-provoking. Reflecting on everything we've discussed, we'd love to hear from you. What have you learned so far? Share one key takeaway or lesson you plan to apply in your own life in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue bringing valuable content your way. Together, let's make a difference one step at a time.